As a new player to the game nowadays, passes get you to 1540 immediately, and you have a rental 5x3 for a few months. But what happens when you, as a new player, builds an alt or wants to create your own real build with accessories off the market? Without the experience, this seems like a daunting and very expensive venture, especially when you don't have the greatest gold income. But I'm looking to make this process simpler and cheaper using some basic experience I've learned over my time playing the game. Welcome to the video. I've been making a few videos over the past few weeks geared to help new and returning players to Lost Ark get a fast and quick catch up to things that I've learned during my tenure as a player. Here are my credentials, by the way. The new player experience isn't great in this game, so hopefully my video aids with this. This is all inspired by comments made on a previous video of mine, making fun of the fact that I said Predator Slayer was a cheap build, which it is. I'll be breaking down fundamentals of engravings in Lost Ark and different ways to game the auction house to get the cheapest possible 5x3 or 5x3 plus 1 for your build, and specifically for a Predator Slayer character. Let's get into it. This is quite a lengthy guide, so I suggest checking out the chapter markers to jump between information that is of interest to you. If you are new though, I do suggest checking out the whole video as I have crammed it full of worthwhile information. First off, we need to go over a few fundamentals of the game. There are a ton of engravings in this game. At first glance, it's overwhelming, as you don't know which ones you should use. Things like Crushing Fist and Necromancy sound cool, but in reality, they are useless engravings that are not used and a quick way to get further gatekept if you use them. At this point in the game, a lot of veteran players know the basic 5 engravings all classes should be using, so going off meta is highly impractical, not just from an optimal damage perspective, but from getting into a lobby's perspective. This is similar for stats. You may find a high quality necklace with a perfect engraving split for your build, but if you have off meta stats like using Crit Swift on a spec character or use any of the useless stats, you will likely get further gatekept. Stats like Domination, Endurance, and Expertise are not used in any builds besides super off meta builds that are typically for bussing or PvP. Additionally, stat splits for builds are also very important, so make sure your build follows the meta build you are basing your character off of. I've seen it plenty where, let's say you're a spec class where you heavily depend on spec breakpoints for damage and rotations. Having crit or swift stats thrown in there will also be a red flag for lobby leaders. Another fundamental you have to understand is the importance of Grudge. You may hate the idea of Grudge. A lot of us did at the start, hoping to replace it with another damage engraving of equal or more value. As a DPS character, it is a staple for every and all builds and is a must. Going without it screams unreliability on survivability throughout the raid, and since it is in every DPS build, it is the easiest thing for a raid leader to spot as problematic in your build. As a new player, you're fighting against the gatekeeping from your roster level, so having your build squeaky clean is a must so that you can get into your lobby faster. One last basic before we get into build making is the dreaded Pheon system. Pheons are a form of market stabilizer that Smilegate has put in place in the game. Not all purchases on the market cost them, but all purchases on the auction house do. Note that there are 2 tabs, the second tab being specifically the auction house for your gear for your character, and the first tab being the market, which has various items across the board. Pheons can be purchased from the shop and cost blue crystals. Now, to purchase blue crystals, you have to pay gold based on the market rate. This is basically a transaction between you and another player who is trading their royal crystals for gold. So depending on how the market is, this can range from like 300 to 3,000 per 95 crystals. Note that it's typically around 1,800 to 3,000 nowadays. You can buy Pheons in singular pieces or in bulk for a reduced cost. Keep in mind, a basic 5x3 with Relic is less than 100 Pheons, but that doesn't account for the ability stones, which can be fickle, but we will get into that later. Additional note, each tier of accessories have different costs, ranging from 0 at epic and 35 at ancient level, depending on your baseline and class you're looking to kit. Sometimes the Pheon cost alone is more expensive than the accessories, so keep that in mind. You don't want to frivolously throw these away for stuff that you just want to test out. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of accessories, the 2 book slots are huge factors in creating your builds, but specifically building cheaper. There are 3 tiers of books currently in the game: Rare, Epic, and Legendary, respectively netting you 6, 9, and 12 slots filled of the 15 total available per engraving. From a baseline perspective, you want to have at least your 2 picks be of Epic tier. To fill a tier, you'll need 20 of the required tier level of books to then be able to advance to the next tier. You will want to achieve Legendary engravings at some point, probably sooner than later, for the cheapest possible builds going forward. forward. It used to be a must to have at least one legendary book to achieve a 5x3 with a typical 7/7 stone. With the addition of the ancient accessories, you have a bit more play. But no, you will be forced to play with 3/6 accessories, which will be the most expensive versions of accessories on the market, regardless of their quality. Typically, when you decide on a legendary engraving to invest in, you go for one that will be used on alt characters in the future, as this will keep paying back as you create builds on all those characters. This makes less sense if you're a one character main, but for anyone else, this is the most cost-effective way. Value of legendary books varies drastically based on their meta use. For example, engravings like Keen Blunt, Raid Captain, and Ambush Master are used in many of the meta builds, so their cost retains itself in some fashion because, as stated previously, many alts rely on recycling this one book as many times as possible. This is why the Grudge book has always been the most expensive battle engraving on the market, because it is used on every build. It is the go-to legendary book to invest in, as there's no other engraving that is used amongst every DPS build. It would be unwise for me to suggest Grudge or these other alternatives to purchase in the market, except for the fact that there are plenty of ways to get free legendary engraving selectors in the game, whether that be the Legion Raids vendor, the bridge, or even Rowan PvP rewards. Some of these take longer than others to acquire, but investing time to get them makes acquiring one of the more expensive legendary books much simpler. There are also class engravings that come in legendary varieties, and the cost of these books are directly related to how popular they are in the meta and how recently they were released in our region. If the balance patch has completely revitalized a class, cost of books can go from 100 gold apiece to like 3,000 overnight, as a community hype starts stripping the market of any and all listed. Similar to my previous point, there are also a variety of ways to get many of these for free via side content, or just the honing event in general. I know personally I received 12 class engraving books from my Soul Eater in this most recent Makoko Express, so I would imagine that bump plus the other free avenues for class books will get you all or close to the 20 required. With the ease in which you can achieve legendary books as a new player, I personally believe it is optimal to have 2 legendary tier engravings slotted in, as it provides heavy cost savings on all accessories. Please remember though, when choosing your legendary battle engraving, especially if you opt out of Grudge, that you opt into one of the engravings that would be reused potentially amongst the other characters on your roster, even if you have a one character roster for the foreseeable future. Those really cheap legendary battle engraving books look tempting, but their use in finding cheap accessories far outweighs the cheapness of the book, but we'll get into that later. Quick reminder, it is not required to have legendary books slotted, but it is for Epic. Although it isn't required, it is far cheaper if you have them be legendary, especially if you are a newer player who hasn't utilized the free books from horizontal content. As mentioned previously, some engravings are more expensive than others, and this isn't just from an engraving book perspective. Accessories that have non-popular engravings attached to them typically will go for less on the market than pairs of popular engravings. A TLDR for this video would be that I'm just breaking down the supply and demand of the market in Lost Ark. Something like Ambush Master and Adrenaline will be astronomically more expensive than an engraving like Master's Tenacity and Raid Captain. Raid Captain may be super popular, but the engraving Master's Tenacity is only used by one class, which makes demand for it significantly smaller. Lots of classes, especially meta popular classes, will use Ambush Master and Adrenaline, so people are able to list these accessories for much higher prices and have them get bought out sooner. So knowing what engravings in your chosen build are used across many different builds is key to finding cheaper accessories on the market. Some go-to cheaper paired engravings are Mass Increase and Cursed Doll. Mass Increase only outweighs its downside if you hit a swiftness breakpoint to negate its speed reduction, so classes that can use it are limited, and Cursed Doll is typically opted away from due to its healing negatives. Classes that use more of the non-meta engravings like Supercharge or Barricade, if you plan it out correctly, you can get a dirt cheap build with decent quality. Additionally, some pairings specifically are opted away from. They may be meta use engravings, but the pair together are not. For example, Keen Blunt and Ambush Master are super popular engravings, but put together, the classes that use this pairing is relatively low. This is because the Ambush Master classes use the Entropy Relic set. Now, based on how that set affects crit damage, and similarly how Keen Blunt affects crit damage as well, the benefits of Keen Blunt only top other engravings if you have a much higher crit rate, thus its limited use on entropy classes. One other example of this would be pairing of additive engravings. I won't get into the nitty-gritty of the specifics, but some engravings have additive effects on damage and some have multiplicative. Typically folks are making these builds are factoring this in, and having just one additive engraving is optimal rather than 5. So something like Cursed Doll and Adrenaline may be be cheaper in some scenarios on the market, specifically due to the fact they are both additive. Now, quick refresher. It is important to know the difference between engravings that are used often between many classes and those that are found less in builds. This determines their cost on the market, especially when paired together. There are essentially 3 categories for used engravings: super popular, less popular, and rare. Pairing your super popular engravings on accessories with your less than popular or rare engravings is the route to go when looking to get the cheapest possible build. Keep these 3 categories in mind for the rest of the video. Now that we have an understanding on expensive engravings, let's look at the other factors involved when buying: the stats and quality. We have determined that endurance, domination, and expertise are useless, but how do crit, swift, and spec affect costs? Well, the sad truth to this all is, if you're a spec-based class, you're going to have a harder time kitting yourself out for cheap. This is because spec amount on spec-based classes tied directly to gauge gain and damage outputted. The damage gained on a Surge Deathblade, for example, is 1% damage per Surge per 10 specialization stat. Surge is one of the best examples of scaling, as the majority of the class's damage comes from just one skill. Whereas there's other spec classes that don't scale as hard with every bit of spec, but still need it regardless for a seamless rotation based on meter gain. Swiftness and crit classes have it easier, as they typically don't need the highest quality possible to achieve the desired baseline for the class to function. I'm not saying quality doesn't reflect for their damage output, because it does, but the quality isn't as integral to them as spec-based classes. For this reason, if you haven't already noticed, spec accessories tend to have a much higher average cost on the market than their crit or swiftness counterparts. So if you happen to not be a spec class looking to build a 5x3, count your blessing. Accessories provide different quantities of each stat. Necklaces provide up to 500 of 2 stats, earrings provide up to 300 quality, and rings up to 200. The scaling of stats directly ties to what you can expect their cost to be, with necklaces always being the most expensive item on average, and earrings following, then rings. Obviously, the chosen pair of engravings with the type of accessory highly affects the cost, but knowing the amount of stats you get per, depending on quality of course, lets you know what to expect when figuring out your order of operations, but I will get to that more in a bit. The last part to the puzzle is your stone. If you take a look at the auction house, they can run from 25 gold per to 2,500 per. So it's good to see what your options are before you lock it in. 2,500 may sound fine a few times, but what if you have to roll 30 plus stones? That now is more expensive than potentially your whole build, and that hasn't even factored in the Pheon cost per stone. At this point, based on everything I've mentioned, you ideally want to have 1 to 2 legendary engravings slotted, and you have noted if you have a less popular or rare engraving in your chosen build. With your 2 engravings slotted, you have 3 engravings with nothing in them. Using the stone, you will look to fill 6 to 7 plus per the chosen 2 slots. Ideally, you would set the less popular or rare engravings to not be on the stone, but once again, if the pairing of the other 2 engravings is pretty high in the market, you may have to opt to not have that be on your setup, but we can still work around that when looking for accessories. Note, at minimum, with legendary engravings equipped and looking to stay in the relic accessory pool, having a 6-7 stone is the bare minimum you want to roll. Most would say 7-7, but 6-7 will work at a 1540 eye level. At this point in the video, you are just doing market research. Don't actually purchase anything just yet. Just decide on what 2 engravings you will have on your stone. Side note, you cannot have class engravings on your ability stones. One last factor before we go looking for accessories is the red stats attributed on all relic accessories and above, as well as on your stone. These all have negative effects, whether it be defense, attack power, attack speed, or movement speed. Depending on how many you have stacked, it ramps up its negative effect. In most cases, the goal is to get no red stats stacked up to the tier 1 or 5 slots. So when you go searching for accessories, finding accessories with high quality for low prices with 1 or 2 of the negative stat is the goal, as a lot of your work when pairing your accessories, especially near the latter end of the build process, make sure those negative stats don't stack, which will tie into your order of operations, which we will go over in the next section. Before we start, go to the Nexus, find the class and build that you want to play, and use one made by people who spent countless hours finding the best options for that class to roll with. Check and see if there are certain breakpoints you need to hit stat-wise for your specific build to function properly, and note that for your buying process. Next, you'll need to be using a tool like loatodo.com. This is key to do this process without losing your mind. Choose your 5 or 6 engravings that you have pulled from the Nexus and start filling out the base information like chosen 2 engravings for your stone, the 2 books, slots and how many slots they are filling, obviously depending if they're epic or legendary, so 9 or 12 slots. Also, for the auction house, play with the search settings. Set your minimum of each at 3 and then play with a max to see options for each. Many new users don't tweak the setting when buying or selling, so they miss out on a lot of prices and items that would help their builds. Side note, I wouldn't fully buy your build during this section of the video. I give a few more tips later on and do an example, which I presume would help your process. Now we begin looking at the market for a class engraving ring. If you've been following my advice and already kitted a legendary class engraving, then you are just looking for a +3 to finish the class engraving. You want to be looking primarily in rings, as quality of a ring doesn't have that much of effect on stats gained from it, unlike earrings and necklaces, so they are typically cheaper, and getting a low quality class engraving ring in most cases isn't actually the worst thing for your build. You could always upgrade later, but it isn't required. Ideally, if you find a somewhat cheap 3-5 ring with your stat and another engraving in your chosen pool, that is ideal. But worst case, you find a 3-3 or a 3-4. If you didn't opt for a class engraving book, people actually sell +5 engraving items fairly cheap in many cases, so look into that. Don't buy the ring you found, just favorite it and put its engraving spread plus red stats into the engraving calculator. Next, we move on to the necklace, because this is the most important accessory besides class accessory, as it nets the most stats and is typically the accessory you want the highest quality. It is also on average the most expensive item on the market. I push for you to have a 3-5 class accessory ring because getting a higher quality necklace for cheap with a 3-3 engraving is fairly common. Sometimes folks will put up a 3-4 necklace of high quality for low, not realizing when they search for prices they weren't seeing the 3-3 option to have a baseline. This is where you want to play with different combinations of engravings, with specific focus on those that are less popular or rare. Next up, the earrings. You ideally also want a pair of those less popular engravings of your options, looking for a 3-5 with 5 being the less popular option. Play around with your options. You also want higher quality typically on earrings. Finally, onto the last ring. This could potentially be a highly popular pairing, but at like 50 to 60% quality could be dirt cheap, so check that out. Typically these latter 3 accessories would be a 3-5 minimum on each. While filling out your to-do sheet and looking at engravings, make sure to leave 1 red stat completely untouched. This is the route I go every time. Many people will roll stones first so that they can get it over with and build accordingly if they get lucky. I don't plan around potential luck, and I found much more success playing as if I had a wide variety of options and not reducing those set options because I wanted to get the stone over with. The method I suggest, as you're filling your accessories, specifically after a good necklace and class engraving ring, have in mind 2 red stats that haven't been touched. Then, as you fill the earring and the last ring, make sure one of those red stats never gets any points added. Then, when you do your stone at the very end, you will have 4 arrows you can make. If you have been marking and favoriting throughout the process, make sure your build works by double checking your to-do list and what is marked on the market. There's been many times I've inputted the wrong numbers in the wrong box, which has caused massive frustration. So just double check this before making any purchases. One more tip, if you are having trouble finding cheap accessories, 5x3s in the ancient accessory market are actually much cheaper in many cases, notably not class engravings. So flip between Relic and Ancient to see the difference of cost, but also factor in the difference of Pheons per, as Relic is 15 Pheons per, but Ancient is 35. After you found a nice set on the market that you've double checked, make sure to purchase and begin the next step of rolling stones until you hit, which for some lucky individuals is instant, but for most it's expensive and annoying. If you're feeling like you're 100 or so off from your stat from hitting a certain breakpoint, let's not forget about bracelets. At 1490 content on this level or higher, we'll begin dropping Relic bracelets. These will have 2 to 4 lines for different effects with a max of 2 stats ranging from 0 to 100. There are a bunch of really good effects that you can land, but equally and more useless ones. So another RNG system you'll have to overcome. Ideally, you don't want to purchase one of these off the market, but get one over time that you can roll. That being said, if you have a breakpoint, potentially having to buy a high spec bracelet that doesn't have any other good stats off the market and rolling for like 4 to 8k might be the go-to method. So a quick refresher of the order of operations. Class ring into a 3-3 or 3-4 necklace, ideally for best qual and cheapest cost, into your 2 high quality earrings, and finally your last ring, followed by rolling your stone until you hit a 6, 7 or higher. Keep in mind, you don't want your negative stacks to stack up to 5 in any of their categories, and scan the market, especially between Relic and Ancient accessories, for best prices. Finally, keep in mind which engravings are not popular, as mentioned in a previous section, and try to utilize them to pair with popular ones to achieve the cheapest possible accessory with the highest quality for your budget. I think if you follow this order of operations, you will have much better success finding a lower cost, higher quality build. Once again, note, finding cheap spec accessories is tough, so really use some of these methods I've mentioned previously to find a good fit for you and your budget. So you may be wondering about ancient accessories. Why even go with them if they cost more Pheons? Well, interested viewer, there's two main reasons. The first and more popular reason is, with anything below a 9/7 stone, which is ultra rare, the max possible engraving setup is a 5x3 with Relic accessories. Now, if you happen to be super lucky and got a 9/7, with Relic accessories you can achieve a 5x3 +1. On average, this +1 nets your character 3 to 5% more damage depending on the fight. Now, ancient accessories have the option of a 3/6, an additional 1 slot on the higher side, which in total with a full 3/6 setup is another 5 potential slot fills. So a +1 is now feasible for the average stone holder. Those with 9/7 have the ability to make a +2, but note the 7 on your 9/7 will be the engraving that will be the +2. The ability to get a +1 is the big appeal of ancient accessories. But note, the ability to get a +1 doesn't mean you should negate quality. High quality of Relic accessories would outweigh the benefits of low quality ancient accessories and a +1. Depending on your Relic setup, it can be quite easy to upgrade some Relic accessories to ancient to receive that +1, but it all depends on the spread of your current accessories and the stone that you have rolled. If you got unlucky with a 9/6 stone because it's one off a 9/7, find solace that you can just upgrade to one 3/6 accessory for a +1. Now, the other reason to upgrade to ancient accessories is the slight stat gain. This isn't more of the base stats like Swift or Spec, don't get too excited. These are the dexterity, intelligence, and strength stat lines, which should increase your total damage with a full set of ancient accessories by 2 to 2.5%. This isn't much, but a nice plus if you're upgrading. But reminder, go for equal or more base attack stats on accessories rather than the low quality +1 option. This isn't the only ancient upgrade you can make. Another notable upgrade for damage is from bracelets. You can upgrade your current Relic bracelet to an ancient one, now allowing 5 total effects, and your max 2 base stats can now max out at 120 instead of 100. If you want to do this, just head over to the bracelet vendor and go to the upgrading tab, and with enough math you can upgrade. Also note, if this is a new character and you have an existing 1540 character, you can mail 20 items per day to your other characters. So it's actually beneficial to not just save good bracelets to roll, but to save some ancient bracelets in your accessory inventory for a rainy day to send over to an alt for an instant upgrade. Since when you dismantle, you get mats for bracelets of that tier level. Note, this is also nice for stocking up on mats and crafting new Relic bracelets per se to see if you get a good roll on that as well. If upgrading from Relic, all the base stats increase by 20, and all the effects will increase in value. Additionally, you'll be given another line to roll. So if you had 4 lines, when you upgrade, those 4 will be locked, but the 5th can now be rolled 3 more times. Just note that your current stats will be locked when you upgrade, so make sure you've either rolled as much as you can or have hit stats that you're liking before you upgrade. There are calculators out there to see, based on your class and stats, how much additional damage your bracelet gives you, with some decent rolls netting 8 to 16% damage gain in some instances. So be sure to check those out if you're interested from a numbers perspective. Check the description for that calculator as well. The other accessory that can be upgraded is your stone, but this will only net you more vitality, not more slots filled. You can do this by doing Chi-Angle weekly and obtaining the RNG drops over time. Eventually, you can upgrade to level 1 for the HP gain with the basic drops, but the higher tiers requirements are more rare. For example, my main has been doing hard mode Chi-Angle since release and has never dropped a golden book, which is necessary to have 5 for the level 4 stone. You can use lower tier mats to craft, but after a few months, I've only been able to craft 4 of the 5 at this point. So here's hoping. These upgrades all cost 6,000 gold per level. You can skip all the way to level 3 if you get lucky with mats, but that will still cost 18,000 gold. Most people don't care for upgrading this for its extra vitality, but some want a little more buffer with their health for on eye level rating progs. So it's up to you. I can't imagine anyone gatekeeping based on stones or even for having full ancient gear, but at the higher level rating and going into Voldus, 5x3 +1 may become mandatory for a lot of parties. This isn't mandatory to have in the slightest, and I doubt until Pheomine will the gatekeeping for +1s become a staple. But if you're newer to the game and are fighting against your lower roster, anything helps when fighting against the tens of others also applying to these lobbies. As promised, the example section. There was countless comments laughing at the prospect of a cheap Predator build. I commented to one of the replies that my build cost me less than 45k on the week of Predator's release, so prices for accessories, especially for this class, were inflated massively, but I FOMO'd and did it. This obviously did not include book costs, so I can't remember how many free books that Express was giving back then in comparison to now and how many I had stored, so I can't factor that in as it's an unknown for me. But the accessories were less than 45k, and I think 30k of that was just for the class ring. Also for the doubters, the total clip length of me starting and finishing my search was 19 minutes and 46 6 seconds, so note that when thinking this is a long process. If you look at my current build, it's the exact same. The only thing that's changed was the bracelet. So what does it cost nowadays, and how do I go about doing this process? Now, with Loa to do, setup, and pulling the 5x3 setup from the Nexus page for Predator Slayer, I can see there aren't necessarily any stat breakpoints, but obviously the higher stats, the better, the flow and the damage, but I won't be restricted to only Giga quality items, so that's nice. Note, I'm inputting 12 slots for both the class engraving and grudge, as this is the process I follow every time, having legendary books for both of the slots. Reminder, as a new player, you have a bunch of ways to get free legendary books of your choosing for both class and battle legendary engravings, so utilize that if you're going for more expensive options like grudge and a meta class engraving. In cases where you have a class with a class book at like 200 gold, I would just buy that off the market, as that cost is just about 4,000-ish. So as we begin, I will follow my order of operations. I look up a cheap class ring. After I browse for a while, I find two options. They aren't great due to their cost, but not horrendous either. Noteworthy is there are a bunch of class engravings plus 5 options on the market for cheap. So if you opt for 2 legendary books slotted that aren't class, you can see there are plenty of options. I did look using a baseline of 3-3 to see any and all options, and ancient accessories, as presumed, were much more expensive for the class option. I also looked through recent sales and saw there were many great options that sold for quite low, that if I wasn't speed running this, I could potentially wait for another to drop. I have 2 options marked, and I move over to the necklace. I'm setting my baseline quality and search setting as 70, as anything below is quite useless. We really want the best quality possible, but by setting 70, you get rid of most of the trash. My one tip for this, if you are having extended difficulty, as you need high quality for a breakpoint, but costs are super high, note that this accessory has 2 stats. What this means is, if you are having truly a hard time, get rid of the 70 quality requirement and go to the one stat that you need high and increase that value and leave the other blank. This will then do a market search, and there could be a low quality option, but have a near perfect one of the one you want and terrible of the other side stat. This is obviously not optimal, but in cases like my War Dancer that needed basically perfect quality spec across the board for its breakpoint, having 497 spec and 437 of swiftness won't break your build in most cases. And you can replace at a later time when you get more gold. Once again, not optimal, but if you're FOMOing on a build and need to hit that breakpoint, then this could work. In my search for a Slayer neck, I find a lot of 20k plus options. Once again, checking the recent sales, I can see that there are plenty of cheap, super high quality 3-3 necklaces that have sold in recent days that I've just missed. So if I had patience, I could just wait. But I did a quick search and there was in fact a 5-3 Predator neck with Raid Captain of decent high quality in 2 formats with the same red stats. So if I wanted a few more quality for 2k more, I had that option. So I marked that and removed the rings I had saved, as this creates the best of both worlds. I can now get super cheap accessories based on this setup. I then move to earrings. I note that this build uses mass increase, so I focus on that here to pair with the other engravings for a cheap option. I found 2 options paired with it to get both my earrings complete. At this point in the build, you only need 2 options left. You should have had a 6/6 stone set in the lower to do options. Now you can switch to add a 7 to one of these slots. By looking at your build, you can see which with a 7 will be a clean fill. In my case, I opted to go for mass increase 7 because of the options going forward would allow me to find a clean 5-3 on 2 rings. I also noted that at this point, there was a +3 on both earrings for move speed and defense, and a +2 for attack speed reduction on the necklace. This isn't the greatest setup because it forces my rings to only have +1s or 1 +2, or I will be penalized. Typically at this point of looking for your last 2 accessories, you'd have 2 non-touch negative stats. But for me, there's only 1, and we're leaving that for the stone. So I searched for my first ring, and at decent quality and price with only a +2 in the option that I had that could take that negative, I lock it in. Then we move to my last ring. This is truly in the process where options start to not be there and your build needs to be reconfigured, as options may be limited. My only options were super expensive, so I lowered the quality threshold, as once again this is a ring and it won't affect us too much, and still no luck as the red stats conflict. I then try ancient accessory options and find a 6-3 option that works perfectly with what I have on the board already. Typically one doesn't get this lucky and will have to shift a few accessories around at this point. Also note this is a 6-3, so if I wanted to, I could reduce one of my 3-5 earrings to a 3-4 if I wanted a cheaper option. But my options were already very cheap, so this is the build. At this point I would start rolling stones based around the 6-7 I was trying to achieve, but also the red stat that I left open and untouched, which was attack power in this instance. It just so happens that that was a stone I had initially gone for, so it works out in the end. Going over the total accessory cost, the neck is a majority of the cost, being either 10 to to 12k based on how many stats I wanted. Then basically 1 to 1.5k for each accessory besides the 6.3 ring, which was a 3.5. Now, relic accessories cost 15 Pheons and ancient 35. So the total use of Pheons would be 95. So I can round this up to being a sub 20k build. Note, most of your Pheons as a new player should already be earned via your express pass, so you shouldn't really have to buy. Plus the 10 weekly from events stacks up. Stone is the wild card, but I remember rolling the stone. Took 2 tries for a 7-7, but rolled the third since I had already bought it and achieved a 9-6. It would only require me shifting one of my mass increase earrings to a 6-3 and my one ring to a 6-3 so that my one earring can be fashioned into a 3 raid captain 5 adrenaline. That, based on the Nexus, is the ideal 5x3 plus 1 option for this build. So with accessories that cost just under 18k that took less than 20 minutes to find both the 5x3 and the 5x3 plus 1, you can see that Predator Slayer can be fairly cheap, and if you use these methods, can even make those pesky high spec classes bend the knee to a budget. Just a quick reminder as we tail off the video. As shown in the previous section, recent sales on the market show that it is common for high quality pieces of gear to be placed on the market at much lower prices sporadically, but what does this mean? Well, if you have patience, you can specifically look over time for the 2 pieces that will likely be the most expensive in your gear, that being the neck and the class ring. Getting a low cost accessory that was just thrown on the market for the sake of it makes the cost of your build much less and more feasible on a low budget. So maybe taking it slow to find cheap pieces for these first 2 accessories, then finishing the build after would probably suit your low cost goals. Note, I'm not saying to do this for every piece. Finding a low cost piece that meets your current build specifically can take a very long time. Having it be the first 2 or 3 works out well because you can tailor the build as it's being made. The last 2 are basically confined to 2 options. Chances of those specific pieces going to the market and for low is significantly lower. One last tip, accessories can only be traded a max of 3 times. So check that when buying your gear, as it shows outright. Buying an item that has no trades available after reduces its value to 0 after you buy it, so keep that in mind during this process. Hopefully all the steps listed above have helped you out with the current and future accessory shopping in Lost Ark. These are my own methods that I have personally used for countless sets on all my characters and found that it has worked best. It was refined in my first year of play as I, like you, hadn't found a good way to make a good gold income weekly. So being able to gear my mains and alts for cheap as possible was priority if I wanted to function properly in the game. My gold income nowadays is much more flush, but I still use these methods to this day. So I'm hoping this has helped any newer or returning players feel a little less overwhelmed with this aspect of the game, because I know I used to be. This script is around 7,000 plus words, and I've tried to cram as much good information in as possible, but let me know if I've left something crucial out, or even if this was helpful so I can justify the extreme length of this script. If you have any further questions, let me know in the comments. I typically respond to everything. Even if I somehow miss the question, typically someone out there will be able to address in a helpful manner. I'm testing a membership method on YouTube for direct help if you want it, with a chat that I can reply to more directly with various help if you want something more direct with me. I've set it at $2.99, as I imagine if I set it super low, I probably wouldn't be able to respond to all the messages at a good pace, so I think this is a happy medium. But note, any help you would want, you can just comment on the video and I will assist for no price at all. The membership is just further support. I'm on the fence about making a guide on gold earning methods for new players, or potentially a guide for honing more efficiently throughout the game. If there's something you would be interested of the 2, let me know. Or even if there's another aspect of the game that you want more information on, let me know as well. This video was spurred into form by comments on a previous video, so I think this method works out best. Check out the previous video I have made. Notably, the last one goes over one of the aspects of Lost Ark combat you probably haven't heard of that will improve your damage tenfold. Or just check out my Lost Ark playlist for all the guides I have made thus far for something tailored more for your interest and knowledge. Until the next video, have a good one.